Washington, trying to end the longest partial government shutdown in U.S. history, as many Democrats stay away from the Capitol and are showing no signs of being willing to compromise on the border wall, at least not in public.
Democrat John Garamendi of California, Republican Bob Whitman of Virginia are still in D.C. We'll ask them what deal they would be willing to make.
And a very crowded field. More Democrats throw their hats in the ring to make a run for the White House in 2020. Could former Vice President Joe Biden be the next to make it official? Welcome to America's News Headquarters from Washington. I'm Kristen Fisher.
You know, it's so snowy and beautiful behind you, Kristen. I almost wish I was there with you. Emphasis on the word almost. I'm Leland Vittert in a sunny Los Angeles. President Trump tweeting out at Democrats today, urging them to get back to the bargaining table over border wall funding and an end to the shutdown. He's also firing back this weekend at a Washington Post article that says he has concealed details about meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ellison Barber made her way to the north lawn of the White House despite the snow with more. Hi, Ellison.
Hey, Leland. So according to a new report in the Washington Post, President Trump has gone to extraordinary lengths to try and conceal the details of his conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, even taking possession of the notes from one of his interpreters, telling that person not to discuss what occurred with other administration officials. The Post reports the constraints that Trump imposed are part of a broad pattern by the president of shielding his communications with Putin from public scrutiny and preventing even high-ranking officials in his own administration from fully knowing what he has told one of the United States' main adversaries. As a result, U.S. officials said there is no detailed record, even in classified files, of Trump's face-to-face interactions with the Russian leader at 5 locations over the past 2 years. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called the report outrageously inaccurate, but it is not the only report this weekend focusing on the president and interactions with Russia. A separate report, this one in the New York Times, claims the FBI investigators actually opened an investigation into President Trump days after he fired then FBI Director James Comey to determine whether or not Mr. Trump was working for Russia against American interests, knowingly or unwittingly. President Trump called the report and the suggestion that he's ever worked for Russia insulting. Republicans say it is evidence of corruption at the FBI. Democrats disagree.
I find it astonishing, and to me, it tells me a lot about the people running the FBI, McCabe and that crowd. I don't trust them as far as I throw them. So if this really did happen, Congress needs to know about it.
They had to have a very deep level of concern about this president to take this step. And that's, again, why we need to protect the Mueller investigation.
A spokesperson with the FBI declined to comment on that report in the New York Times. Leland?
Ellison Barber, north lawn of the White House. Ellison, thank you. Lindsey Graham had a lot more to say, including a lot about the shutdown and a possible deal. For all of that, stick around after our show for Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace has an exclusive interview with Senator Graham where he talks about possibly a comprehensive immigration reform package. You don't want to miss that. Kristen?
So the clock keeps ticking with no deal in sight to end the partial government shutdown that has become the longest federal closure in the nation's history. And it's costing the U.S. economy over $3 billion as hundreds of thousands of federal employees went without a paycheck on Friday. Molly Hennenberg is live with more. Molly?
Hi, Kristen. President Trump says he's hoping Democrats will, quote, act responsibly and resume negotiations over border security and the government's shutdown. He tweeted today, "I'm in the White House waiting. The Democrats are everywhere but Washington as people await their pay. They are having fun and not even talking." In part, he's referring there to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus's Bold PAC meeting in Puerto Rico this weekend. According to a Fox News producer, New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez was photographed on the beach, although Bold PAC will not say which members of Congress are on the trip. The group went to see the play Hamilton, which is partly a fundraiser for Puerto Rico. But the trip itself did not sit well with the president.
It's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. We have a very important thing to do. We have to have border security, and we have to get people getting paid again very quickly.
But are Democrats willing to give the president some money for border security if the president agrees to some concessions on how the government handles people in the country illegally?
I think the president should test that by making it clear what concessions and what compromise he's willing to put forward.
South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says he suggested to the president that the president reopen the government for a short time to see if both sides could reach a deal, and if not, then declare a national emergency.
To my Republican colleagues, stand behind the president if this is his last option. He ran on this as a centerpiece of his presidency, and it is a crisis. And if you don't see the crisis, you're not looking very hard.
Senator Graham says if Democrats won't give the president any money for the wall, he won't just, quote, give in. Kristen?
So the president won't give in, and Speaker Pelosi continues to say $0 for the wall. So sure feels like we're right back where we started. Molly Hennenberg, thank you.
Thank you.
Leland.
All right, let's see if we can make a little progress. We bring in California Congressman John Garamendi. Boy, Congressman, your state's pretty nice, especially when it's snowing in D.C. I got to tell you that.
Give it up. Don't say that you're in sunny Santa Monica and we're in snowy Washington. It's just not fair, Leland.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of things aren't fair. A lot of people would argue what's going on in Washington isn't fair to just about anybody, sir.
No, you're right.
I guess the question now comes, you listen to Molly's report and then what Kristen said afterwards, it sounds like Groundhog Day all over again.
Well, it certainly is, and this is really a situation that is really outrageous. We're basically holding 800,000 of our government employees and literally the entire American public as leverage to obtain $5.7 billion to build a wall. It's outrageous. And the earlier report about the question of Trump and Russia, if Putin wanted to really hurt America, you'd shut down the American government, the FBI, to transportation, all of that. So let's get this thing going.
Let's deal with the.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's deal with the shutdown first. We'll get to Putin in a second because I know you want to talk about that. At some level, though, this is about politics for Democrats. $5 billion for a wall is a drop in the bucket. It's less than the federal government spends on Medicare fraud, for God's sakes. At some level, aren't Democrats the one holding this money hostage? If the president wants $5 billion, is that worth keeping all these people out of a job for?
Well, it's the president that shoulders the responsibility here. He said so in the Oval Office in an earlier meeting. He said, I will shut down the government unless I get what I want. And what he wanted at that time was $5 billion. It's now $5.7. In his earlier budget that he presented to the Congress, just over a year ago, he asked for $1.6 billion. He got that. And that was the amount of money that was being discussed before that Oval Office meeting when it suddenly went to $5 and now $5.7 billion. The problem here is that the American government and in literally the entire nation is hostage to the president's desire to get this border wall.
Listen to this from Lindsey Graham. Get your reaction. Hold on.
Every Democrat that I've worked with for about 10 years now has agreed to funding for barriers/walls on Obama's watch, on Bush's watch, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing on Trump's watch. What is he supposed to do? Just give in? He's not going to give in.
All of a sudden, if you call it barriers and security, are you guys okay with the 5.7? Because Democrats have been okay with those kind of numbers for border security for a long time.
I was actually intrigued by the word peaches. Maybe that's the word we need to use. Yes, we have been strong supporters of border security going back more than 20 years for myself, going back to the time I was lieutenant governor, not so far from
So
where
is the government shut down and these 800,000 people without paychecks over the semantics of whether it's called a wall, whether it's called fencing, whether it's called a barrier?
Well, we have the obligation to the American taxpayers that the money be spent wisely. Just recently, in the last couple of days, have we received any information about where that $5.7 billion would be spent? Even so, we don't know exactly where the problems are. We don't know the efficiency or the effectiveness of any particular reach of what might become a fence, a wall, or some sort of a barricade. We need that kind of information. We need the time to negotiate, reopen government. Just yesterday, I was talking.
To your point,
Go ahead.
Even some of your Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle agree with you that it'd be easier to get the money if they were more specific. I want to give you a chance to weigh in about some of your Democratic colleagues who are down in Puerto Rico on a fundraising trip and junket, some would call. Sarah Sanders tweeting, Democrats in Congress are so alarmed about federal workers not getting paid, they're partying on the beach instead of negotiating a compromise to reopen the government and secure the border. Fair to say the optics of this aren't great. You're in D.C. Should your Democratic colleagues be there with you?
Well, actually, they went to Puerto Rico for perhaps a fundraiser, but that was a small portion of what they wanted to do there. They were looking at the problems of Puerto Rico. No, actually, take a look at their agenda. They were there to observe. And just remember, 3 days ago,
they're seeing Hamilton. We got pictures of. They're seeing Hamilton. We got pictures of on the beach. We have stories of big dinners that they're at, according to the Washington Examiner. This isn't a roll up your hands fact-finding.
Let's get the full agenda, and then we can answer that question. I don't know the full agenda, but I do know, talking to a couple of folks that went there, that they were looking at an issue that the president actually created when he said he was going to create a national emergency and then take $2.5 billion.
I know you can see the picture that was on the screen. That doesn't look like exactly figuring out what's going on in Puerto Rico from a national emergency standpoint.
We need to put their entire agenda up, and then we can debate whether they're partying or not. But the reality is that the president created a serious problem for Puerto Rico.
I'll make you this offer, and we got to run. But call some of them, get the agenda, send it to us. We'll have you on to talk about it.
Well, why don't you ask them, those who were there, to talk about it. I'm not there. I am in Washington, and we'll see. We'll see if we can get the agenda. Then you can ask them what they did.
Fair point, sir. Enjoy the snow. Stay warm. Stay safe.
Enjoy the sun. Bye-bye.
Kristen?
Well, for a reaction from the Republican side of the aisle, we bring in Virginia Congressman Bob Whitman. Congressman, thank you for driving 2 hours in the snow to be here. Do you wish that more members of Congress had perhaps followed your lead and followed Congressman Garamendi's lead and stayed here in Washington while the government continues to be shut down?
Absolutely. We need to be here working on this issue, which is in the forefront now with the government being shut down. People expect their government to work and get things done. In fact, on Friday, I asked Speaker Pelosi to keep us in session, sent her a letter and said, we have the business of the nation to do. The people that have sent us here expect us to get the job done. They expect us to find common ground. They see, as you've seen from the most recent numbers, there's a realization that there is a crisis at the border. The Washington Post pointed it out, the humanitarian crisis that are there. Families and children are being affected by this. The drugs that pour across the border, all those things need to be taken care of. Our members of Congress should be here in town getting things done.
But since you bring up the Washington Post and ABC News also put out a poll today saying that the majority of Americans blame the GOP, not Democrats, for this shutdown. Are you worried about the political ramifications if this shutdown continues to drag on?
There's also within that poll a increasing realization by the American public that there is a crisis at the border. And I think they look at Congress and said both sides need to be at the table getting things done, finding that common ground, and that the president is correct. The Congress needs to solve this. This is an issue that is critical to a family that's been affected by drugs, opioid overdose. We look at the opioids pouring across the border. The families that are down there whose children are being affected by this. Those are things the American people expect us to do. And all you have to do is to look at, too, what is now mounting coming our way. Another caravan being put together in Honduras. Those things are critical, and people want us to get those things done.
Whatever compromise that Congress comes up with, President Trump is going to have to sign it, and it remains very unclear what sort of compromise he'd be willing to sign off on, what sort of concessions he would make. I want you to listen to something that Democratic Senator Chris Coons said just a few hours ago on Fox News Sunday.
One of the challenges of negotiating with President Trump, as Lindsey Graham knows better than anyone else, is I feel like I've signed up for the Trump of the Day Club. I think the president should test that by making it clear what concessions and what compromise he's willing to put forward.
So do you think that President Trump should be more clear about what concessions he's willing to make?
I think it's critical that leadership in the House and Senate sit down with the president, with his staff, and go through line by line those things that need to be accomplished, the dollars that need to go toward barrier construction, the other elements as part of that, what you call that barrier, the other things of what need to happen with immigration reform. I think you sit in the room, you go through that. The president's already indicated he thought in 45 minutes to an hour you could sit down, find that common ground, and get it done. I think that's the way you come up.
But it hasn't happened so far. I mean, one side is going to have to give at some point. How do you see this playing out? I mean, we're in the longest shutdown ever in U.S. history, and neither side is budging.
Kristen, you're correct. And we can't forget, too, that this impacts the lives of federal employees. It affects their families. They expect us to get this job done. They expect rational, reasonable people to sit down and do this. The only way that this gets done is for everyone to sit down in the room, those people in the leadership positions, as well as the president.
Quite a few times in the Situation Room.
That's right. They got to do it again. They got to do it again. I think it's incumbent that Congress act. And I know the president's reaching a frustration point to say, hey, if you don't, I'm going to go ahead and take action. I'll declare an national emergency. I still believe it's Congress's responsibility to get this done.
So President Trump said yesterday on Twitter that he has a plan to end this shutdown. Do you know what that plan is?
He has not divulged it to us, but I know he is ultimately going to take action with this. He's going to give Congress every opportunity, but ultimately he is going to act.
And finally, do you think that the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, he has been criticized by Democrats for not allowing the Senate to vote on the appropriations bills that would open up at least some of these shuttered agencies. Do you think that the Senate Majority Leader should allow the Senate to vote on these bills?
Well, Senate Majority Leader has been very clear. He is not going to bring any bill to the floor unless he's assured that it's something that the president will sign into law. So I think that's good so that you don't go through a lot of back and forth about passing bills and then having the president veto it.
Why not just go ahead and vote, and if the president vetoes it, the Senate could still come back and override that veto? I mean, these are equal branches of government.
Sure. Well, Kristen, they could certainly do that, but the time that it would take for that to be done, I argue the more timely way to go about it is to have everybody sit down in a room, determine what will the president sign into law, and not go through the back and forth, which essentially becomes a political exercise rather than a true effort to solve the problem.
Well, Congressman, I like your optimism.
Yes.
Hopefully the parties can all get together in one room.
Yes.
And sort this out. We'll see. Thank you so much, Congressman, for coming on. Leland.
Don't hold your breath, but in the meantime, hold your breath for this. Julian Castro, Elizabeth Warren on the 2020 trail yesterday. Is former Vice President Joe Biden next? Plus, new criticisms from within the Democratic Party against these two senators for criticizing judicial nominees' religious affiliations and calling their beliefs extreme, despite being shared by millions of American faithful. Take a closer look at that as millions of Americans deal with severe winter weather. It's pretty, but there have been multiple accidents, highways closed, and unfortunately, a number of deaths as well. Adam Klotz tracking this as the storm moves east. Hi, Adam.
Hey there. Now some of the heaviest snow moving through the D.C. area, as much as 5 to 8 inches in that region, and it's not done yet. I'm going to be tracking it coming up in my full forecast after the break.
This weekend, Garrett Tenney joins us with more. And Garrett, my goodness, feels like it's been a very busy weekend for 2020, and it's only going to get busier.
It's been a very busy weekend, and you're right. It's a very crowded field at this point. I like to say it's like a receipt from CVS. This list just keeps going and going. Now, more than 24 are considering a run. This weekend, 2 candidates officially announced their campaign. On Friday, it was Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Then on Saturday, it was former Obama Housing Secretary Julian Castro, who plans to emphasize his own story of the American dream, being raised by his mother and Mexican immigrant grandmother in humble circumstances, going on to attend Stanford and Harvard Law before becoming the mayor of his hometown, San Antonio.
Good morning. I'm running for president because it's time for new leadership, because it's time for new energy, and it's time for a new commitment to make sure that the opportunities that I've had are available to every American. In the years to come, we must go forward as one nation, working toward one destiny.
Climate change and healthcare will be 2 of Castro's top priorities, along with other Democrats who may run, including Senator Elizabeth Warren. Now, she hasn't officially announced, but she is sure acting like someone that's running. Last weekend, she was in Iowa, and this weekend, she was in New Hampshire, testing out her message with voters.
We need to attack head on the costs that hardworking families face every day. We need to tackle them together. The high cost of health care, the high cost of housing, the high cost of child care, and the high cost of getting an education. That's what we need to attack as a country.
This week, Joe Biden's brother said he thinks the former vice president will run in 2020. At this point, Biden's leading most polls among likely voters and reportedly believes he has the best chance at beating President Trump. Well, last night, President Trump was asked about a potential race against Biden and had this to say.
Who is the one person that you would really like to run against?
Well, I don't want to pick anyone out, but, a lot of people say Biden's doing okay, but, he was always a 1%er. He was a 1% guy. He ran 2 or 3 times. He never got above 1%. And then Obama came along and took him off the trash heap. Then he became a vice president, and now he's probably leading. But he's basically a 1% guy. He's weak.
Joe Biden's reportedly told friends, if I'm walking, I'm running, but he has not given a timetable for when he might decide. However, the list of who is and isn't running is expected to shake out here over the next couple of months.
Like a receipt from CVS. It just keeps growing and growing. I like that, Garrett Tenney. Thanks.
You got it.
Leland.
All right, a little bit more on that. We bring in Los Angeles radio host Larry Marino, AM 870 here in Los Angeles and on the World Wide Web on your favorite internet browser. Larry, we just heard Kristen Fisher call it a receipt from CVS, but we have a picture board of the potential 2020 Democrats, and you almost have to walk up to your television to see any of their pictures and identify them because there's so many. I'll turn this question around for you. Who on that list has a message that's potentially centrist enough to pull away some of your listeners?
At this point, we don't know. The group could be, I think there could be 30 ultimately that run for the Democrats.
It's like a Major League Baseball team.
Let's take the Biden question. Would Biden be a good person to run against? I think it would be for Trump because Biden is the past. And many in the Democratic Party are looking to the left and the future and the youth. They're looking for someone like a Barack Obama to stand out there and come forward, someone who engages them on the issues they care about.
For as much, though, as the right grew to hate Barack Obama and his policies, when he was running in 2008, it was a relatively centrist message. And in fact, most of what he talked about was hope and change. It wasn't really specific progressive policies. Does somebody like a Beto O'Rourke who comes in and allows anyone to sort of paint their own policies onto his message scare Republicans? Should it scare the president?
I don't think so yet. Now, we're going to watch what happens with Beto. He is doing everything but announcing. In fact, he will have an interview with Oprah in early February to...
if live streaming your dental appointment is everything but announcing, he's doing it.
He's doing that. He's getting out there with that. But, a former rocker out there, the Democrats are looking for someone like a Bernie Sanders. A lot of people ask, is Bernie going to run again? He was the one who came across and really took things and really excited the youth last time. I have a friend who's a professor at a college, and he said all of a sudden he saw all these Bernie stickers on the laptops.
Back during 2016, though, as we covered the beginning parts of the race, we used to look for what we thought was the impossible interview, which was going to be a Bernie supporter who, if Bernie didn't win the nomination, they were going to vote for Trump. Turns out there were zillions of them. Does Bernie Sanders have a chance against President Trump in a general?
I think Bernie Sanders has a real challenge, and that is his age. The party, the Democrats, the people who are pushing the progressive end of the party, they're pushing for youth and a certain vibrancy. Yes, he was somebody that they liked, but they have to ask themselves, how's he going to look running? They want to go to a younger narrative. They want to put a youthful candidate up against Donald Trump.
The most youthful of that would be Tulsi Gabbard, 37 years old, congresswoman from Hawaii. Take a listen to her. We'll get a reaction.
Are you going to run for president of the United States and do something about it? Do you think you should? Do you think you should? Are you going to run?
I have decided to run and will be making a formal announcement within the next week.
Friday night on a tape show is not exactly a well-planned rollout. But she does represent the youth. She also represents what the Daily Beast called Bashar Assad's favorite congresswoman.
Well, yes, she went and visited him, something that I think if Donald Trump had gone and done at that point would have kicked him out of even running. She got a pass on that. Also, she's an Iraq War veteran. She has that going for her. She's going to try to claim that mantle. But like anything else, one's past starts to be brought out. And within 24 hours of her running, people are already picking out her past and trying to say that there was a comment she made that was homophobic.
And then we come out and wait for the nicknames that President Trump will develop for each one of them. Larry, appreciate it. A lot to talk about on your radio show on Monday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
From the mid-Atlantic to the Midwest, everyone seems to be dealing with winter weather this weekend, and it sure looks beautiful, but the heavy snow and freezing rain has made for some treacherous roads for travelers, and it's already turned deadly for some. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is tracking it all at the Fox Weather Center. Hey, Adam, and it's still snowing here in D.C. Is this going to go on for a while longer?
Yeah, it's not done yet, Chris. And you know what? It's not just snowing there in D.C. still. It's still snowing back in places like St. Louis, a spot that it started snowing late Friday and early Saturday. So it's been a large system. But the real bullseye at this point is the D.C. area and folks around it. 5 to 8 inches of snow in that particular region. D.C., last I saw, has seen 6 inches of snow. Still a large area where we're under winter storm watches and warnings. If you're in more of the southern portions of these, this is more of an ice event for you. To the north, you're talking about more snowfall. This now going until midnight tonight. It was supposed to end this afternoon. It's been elongated all the way till midnight, so it's not done yet. Now, I do think most of the precipitation's already fallen. This is going to be additional on top of that 5 to 8 inches. That's not looking like a lot, maybe another inch to 3 inches of snow. Again, a lot of it's going to be ice and rain to folks living a little bit farther to the south. But here's the hour-by-hour forecast, and if you're wanting this to move out, pay attention to the timestamp back in the corner. It does snow throughout the afternoon and evening hours, but by the time we get to maybe 10 o'clock around the tail end, definitely, Kristen, by tomorrow it clears off, but it stays cold. So anything that falls today is still going to be on the ground for folks tomorrow morning. Kristen.
Just in time for the kids to go back to school. Adam Klotz. Thanks, Leland.
All right, so did the Pentagon come up with plans for an Iran strike? Rich Edson traveling with the Secretary of State as he tours the Middle East. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Leland. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Riyadh for meetings with senior Saudi officials on Syria, Iran, and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. We'll have that coming up.
Made by Congressman Steve King in an interview last week. First the sound, then the backstory.
I have a scheduled meeting with him on Monday, and I will tell you this. I've watched on the other side that they do not take action when their members say something like this. Action will be taken. I'm having a serious conversation with Congressman Steve King on his future and role in this Republican Party.
You may remember Congressman King made what you could call controversial comments about white nationalism and white supremacy. The longtime member of the House later spoke on the House floor and said he made, quote, a freshman mistake.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting this weekend that the White House National Security Advisor John Bolton was looking at potentially using military options against Iran last year. The Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has not commented on the report. He just met with the Saudi foreign minister in Saudi Arabia about an hour ago, and that's where our Rich Edson is live in Riyadh. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Kristen. That's the first of several high-level meetings for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as he's just arrived here in Riyadh. The State Department says he'll discuss regional issues like countering Iran and Syria. The secretary did refuse to comment on that Wall Street Journal report, which states that the National Security Advisor John Bolton sought options from the Pentagon on striking Iran after Iran-linked militants fired mortars into a diplomatic area in Baghdad. The National Security Council has responded. It says basically that what the NSC's job is to get options to respond to threats for the President of the United States, and that, quote, we continue to review the status of our personnel following attempted attacks on our embassy in Baghdad and our Basra consulate, and will consider the full range of options to preserve their safety and our interests. Here in Riyadh, Secretary Pompeo is scheduled to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The secretary tells us that he does plan to discuss the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
We will continue to have a conversation with the Crown Prince and the Saudis about ensuring that the accountability is full and complete with respect to the unacceptable murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So we'll continue to talk about that and make sure we have all the facts.
He's trying to keep that deal together with a number of the other, or all the other participants, minus the United States. Secretary Pompeo announced on Friday that the United States, along with Poland, next month will be hosting a Middle East-focused summit with dozens of nations. Part of that will be focusing on the regional threat from Iran, according to the secretary. The secretary did arrive in Riyadh from Doha, Qatar, where he made the case that the countries that are in a dispute right now, the regional countries that are in a dispute, should resolve that so they can get united and counter Iran. About 18 months ago, or 16 months ago, the Saudis, along with their allies, blockaded Qatar over a dispute. That blockade is ongoing. Kristen?
Rich Edson, live in Riyadh. Rich, thanks. Leland?
All right, we bring in former California Congressman Darrell Issa, former member of the Foreign Relations Affairs Committee. Good to see you, sir. Appreciate it. We entering a new phase here of the president's foreign policy when you start talking about war plans with Iran?
No, just the opposite. What you have is what commanders-in-chief have done and must do, which is either their Department of Defense asks these questions and periodically briefs them on we have scenarios, or the president asks, are there, directly or indirectly, are there methods we could use? If you don't ask that question of is there a military option, you haven't done your job as the commander-in-chief, and the Department of Defense runs these scenarios regularly.
This brings up an important broader point as Rich is traveling with Secretary Pompeo. He is going through the Middle East. Some have called it an apology tour because of the Syria decision to some of these key allies like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Some have said it's an explanation tour. Whatever it is, it's got to be a reassurance tour. This news coming out at the same time you're in the Saudi capital, hard to imagine that's a coincidence.
Well, look, the Saudis have asked themselves, is there a military solution? And of course, there really isn't for Saudi Arabia. But the United States does have to ask that. And just give you an example.
You could argue Saudi Arabia's already at war with Iran, bombing Yemen and the rebels they support.
There's a proxy war in Yemen. But during the W. Bush administration, Israel was forced to bomb a nuclear facility in northeastern Syria.
Yeah.
And they had to make a decision about whether or not they could do something they'd never done before, which was do that type of an overflight and successfully take out what was in fact a purely weapons production nuclear facility. There's no question in anyone's mind that the United States knew about it, that they had to run the scenario of, does the United States bomb them? Does Israel bomb them? Do we let them bomb them?
I spent a lot of weeks in Jerusalem waiting for such an attack that never happened. It brings up this important question, though. Does our allies in the Middle East believe that the president is going to back up these harsh words and tough words about Iran?
The president has to live up to an obligation that President Clinton, Bush, Obama all made, and that was we were not going to allow a nuclear Iran. Now, most people believe that it would be difficult to actually use military force to eliminate their nuclear capability, but no one believes that if you take military action off, that somehow Iran's going to do it just because they've become nice. So you've got to have that.
We know that John Bolton, now National Security Advisor, a long time argued for regime change. For a long time, he wrote an op-ed saying we needed to bomb Iran. Move you now to the topic of the government shutdown. You left Congress in the middle of a shutdown. And we talked about this. This is, in your words, this is a shutdown over principle. Which makes it harder for both sides to compromise, which somehow has become a dirty word in Washington.
Well, and the president is in an odd situation. He has expressed a principle that the Democratic leadership has already voted for. He has said repeatedly, and sometimes gets chastised, I'll compromise on everything else. on DACA, on money for this or that, but I won't compromise on a principle that you both, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, already voted for.
Real quickly, Chris Coons was on Fox News Sunday, and he talked about this concept that it's sometimes difficult to negotiate with the president because he changes his mind. You know, ahead of this shutdown, there was a deal on the table that appeared to be made to keep the government open and keep negotiating, and then the president took a lot of flack and he pulled that back. Fair argument?
No, not really. The president, as late as Saturday, while I was still a member, sent the vice president with a compromise that was unbelievable. He would take $2.1 billion, about $700 million more than he already had, and reopen the government. And Chuck Schumer said we were very far apart. Now, when $700 million is very far apart in Washington, and by the way, that's about 2 days of the pay for the people who will be paid who are not working, it's very clear, like you said, the president changes, but he changes what he's willing to do to get to a principle he believes in that the Democrats have said they believe in, but somehow won't compromise to get done.
All right, Congressman. Appreciate it. Good luck and Godspeed in your new endeavors. Meantime, enjoy a little time back home.
I will.
We know there were a lot of long commutes. Kristen?
Coming up, President Trump is pushing back against a Washington Post report that says he concealed details about his meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Our political panel will weigh in. Our talk radio panel is here to weigh in. Ben Kissel and Garrett Lewis. Guys, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So, Garrett, I'll start
My
with
pleasure.
you. President Trump said last night that he would be willing to release these details. Do you think that he should do that?
No, I think that these stories are just a complete distraction. I want the president to be focused on getting the wall built, on opening the government by making sure the border can be secured. I think these were just a couple of hit pieces, and the media is just desperate, along with the Democrats, hoping that if they throw something out there, it's just going to stick.
But the Post is reporting that U.S. officials said there's no detailed record, even in classified files, of President Trump's face-to-face interactions with President Putin. So, Ben, I mean, is that a problem?
It absolutely is a problem. Donald Trump is less transparent than the steel slats he wants to put on the southern border. I think we have a better chance of seeing his tax returns than the transcript of what he talked about with Putin. And I want to point out here, let's go in the way, way back machine to 2012 when Barack Obama said, was talking to the then president of Russia, talking about how he'll have more flexibility after the election. The Republican Party freaked out. Now we have a president who cannot definitively say, no, I'm not working with the Russians as a Russian agent. The hypocrisy is disturbing. The blind allegiance is troubling. I think the American people deserve better.
Well, President Trump and his allies say that, you know, they believe that part of his desire for secrecy stems from all of the leaks that have been coming from the White House. So that's his defense, at least at this point in time. And in fact, Senator Lindsey Graham said that he'd like to know who leaked that report to the Post. I want to switch gears, guys, really quick, and I know we could talk about this forever, but I'd like to switch gears and just talk about some infighting that's happening within the Democratic Party, and specifically 2 Democratic senators, including Kamala Harris, who's likely running in 2020 for the White House. They have suggested that a judicial nominee quit a Catholic organization, the Knights of Columbus, and now another 2020 contender, Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She put out an op-ed blasting what those 2 Democratic senators have done. I want to read it to you here. She says, quote, "We must call this out for what it is, religious bigotry. No American should be asked to renounce his or her faith or membership in a faith-based service organization in order to hold public office." So there is a lot to talk about on both sides. We're going to have to leave it right there, though, and we're going to get your reaction on the other side of this break.
Okay.